Today, I quit my job of 6 years, effectively canceling my boss's vacation plans. Read it. What stories of instant karma do you have? Story 1. My first job after high school was working for a famous nationwide guitar store chain. At first, I thought it would be fun, getting to be around guitars all day and talk music with fellow musicians. Turns out, I was wrong. The 10-hour shifts, 5 to 6 days a week, while listening to slightly too loud overheard music and 14-year-olds playing the first 5 bars of Crazy Train over and over again, wasn't actually all that great. However, I stuck it out. I needed money, and I have one of those don't quit ever attitudes. When I got hired, the store was in serious trouble. They had recently fired a huge chunk of the staff for skimming profits and selling pot out of the warehouse. Their numbers were really low, and corporate was breathing down their necks. But as it turns out, I have a penchant for selling stuff that I know about. I was the accessories guy, and I got really good at it. I was routinely rolling $30,000 or better a month out the door. The most expensive thing I had in my department was only $500. I also had one of the lowest return rates in the West Coast and a file with several letters from happy customers saying how much help I had been. Eventually, the store's numbers improved, especially my department. We were eventually number 1 for our district and number 3 on the West Coast, behind Hollywood and San Francisco. However, none of that mattered to the GM or anyone from corporate. All they wanted was more from me. My numbers had to be better every month or I'd get yelled at. I was written up for having a low sales month one January because I went on vacation. I would get daily emails and phone calls from the district and regional managers demanding to know why I hadn't hit X dollars in sales yet. My hours got bumped to the point where my days consisted of sleeping, showering, eating, and working. I had zero social life. My girlfriend at the time would go weeks without seeing me. Eventually, because of the stress, I developed an ulcer, so I decided to quit. I threw myself into the last month, which happened to be December, the month all retail workers hate. I worked extra hours, sold as much as I could, contacted old customers, you name it. I blew everyone out of the water, rolling just shy of $80,000 in gear. My boss called me into his office and said I was doing a good, not great, good job, and to keep it up. I pointed to the sales numbers screen, pointed out how well I had been doing, and how well liked I was by the customers, and asked for a raise. He laughed and said no, so I handed him my resignation letter. 2 weeks later, I was done and started classes in college, something I'd had to put off since work wouldn't allow me to cut hours for school. I came back to the store a couple of months later. Someone who had worked for me called and said they'd found a jacket of mine in the warehouse. When I showed up, the GM wasn't there. And what I was told was that, apparently, corporate had noticed me. When my GM had failed to retain me, they'd fired him. Also, that department went from number 1 to number 9 in the district, out of 11 stores. The district managers were scrambling to recover. A few got demoted because of how things panned out, and the higher-ups were not happy that the district was in such a state. I laughed the laugh of the vindicated. Story 2. I've been working at the same company for over 6 years, and I have been a loyal and reliable employee with a perfect track record. During those 6 years, I've only called in sick twice, achieved the best results, and made the least amount of errors on paperwork in the whole region, and possibly the whole country. However, my new boss didn't seem to think that was enough. He reduced my hours to keep labor costs low, expanded my workload, and never had anything positive to say. He believed in ruling with an iron fist. Despite all this, I was the one who kept his head above water by fixing his errors. Today, I decided to resign from my position with immediate effect, which resulted in canceling his vacation plans for next week. Furthermore, there was no one available to fill my position. When I uttered the words, "I quit," I could see the terror in his eyes. He realized how screwed he was without me and tried to do whatever he could to convince me to stay for at least another week. I have never experienced such a sense of instant karma as I did today. I never intended to ruin his vacation plans, but I couldn't put his needs before mine. I have bills to pay. I would feel guilty about it if he wasn't such a jerk, but he is. Story 3. Build a database for a company over a summer. Boss won't write me a reference out of principle. Database breaks due to error between keyboard and chair. Turn down the boss's plea for help out of principle, thus nullifying my entire summer's work for them. I worked as a database administrator for a community center for one summer during university. Essentially, I created a database to track donations and volunteering hours, including who donated and how much, and who volunteered and for how long. Despite being the youngest staff member by 25 to 30 years, I got along well with all my coworkers except for my immediate boss, who was a total jerk. The following spring, while job hunting, I emailed my former boss for a letter of recommendation. Much to my surprise, she refused, citing principle. I was frustrated because I was struggling to find a job, and not having a reference from my most recent employer was a definite hindrance to my resume. I landed a decent job. Lo and behold, on the first day of my new job, my old boss emailed me, begging me to come in because she had ignored all the warnings in the user documentation I wrote and moved some files, making it impossible to access the database. She asked if I could come in, and I replied that I already had a job and couldn't help her on principle, effectively making my entire summer at the center a waste of time from their perspective. Story 4. My stepdad is a driving instructor, and I went to him to get my license pretty late at the age of 22. One day he was giving me a lesson, and we were going over one of the possible courses that the driving test takes. While we were driving down a street in the suburbs, a guy started tailgating me aggressively. He looked like a scumbag Steve, complete with a sideways hat and all. Every time I stopped at a stop sign, he threw his hands in the air and yelled at me. It was starting to stress me out, but my stepdad said, "Don't worry about it. Watch this." As we continued down the street, my stepdad instructed me, "Okay, now about 50 feet, start slowing down a little bit, and right when you're in front of that school zone, pull over to the right." So I followed his instructions. Right after I pulled over, the guy who was pissed off at me took off like a bullet, and about 5 seconds later, a cop steps out from behind a tree and waves him over for going probably double the speed limit in a school zone. We laughed. Hard. Story 5. My former wife became pregnant by another man while we were still married. I decided to take my son and move out, and he ended up living with her. Instead of seeking revenge or acting out, I chose to step back and let them deal with the consequences of their actions. They were so destructive to each other that I eventually felt sorry for them. The situation resolved itself, and I didn't have to do anything to make it happen. Story 6. I attempted to inform my company that one of their procedures was in violation of the law, but they ignored me and claimed that someone else would have caught it. Later on, while I was on FMLA leave, they wrongly terminated me. Despite being statistically the best employee in my position out of 500 people, I was let go. The company was fined $250,000 for the violation I had brought up several times. Although I'm still unemployed, I spent my days hiking, and I love my life. I have enough savings to last me until I find work. I harbor no ill feelings towards them. Story 7. I worked as a supervisor at Goodwill a few years ago. Because my mother and I enjoyed shopping there and I wanted to gain management experience with a reputable company. Although I knew it would be hard work, I thought it would be my dream job. However, it turned out to be anything but. The manager was all right, but her assistant manager was a tyrant. She would threaten employees every day, saying she would fire them if they didn't do their work right. As a supervisor, I took offense to this because I wanted my team to be happy and motivated to work towards the mission. I wanted it to be a great place to work. However, the constant firing threats created a negative and fearful environment, resulting in low morale and people being afraid of their jobs every day. I met with the manager and respectfully asked her to ask the assistant manager to tone down the firing threats because it made my team nervous, and I wanted to improve productivity in my own way. She said she understood, and I felt good about the conversation. The next day, the manager and assistant manager called me into the office and asked me to lock the door. Then they proceeded to verbally attack me with the most hate-filled words I've ever heard. They accused me of trying to turn them against each other and yelled at me, saying I was worthless and that I should just do my job and not tell them how to do theirs. They went on for 20 minutes, and I almost started crying. I told them to take the job and shove it. I knew they would have a hard time finding someone else. The manager and assistant manager were already working 60-hour weeks with a skeleton crew, and my resignation meant they would now have to work 80 hours each with no weekend until they found a replacement. They called me a scumbag for not giving them 2 weeks' notice and ruining their month, but I was not really concerned about it. Story 8. When I graduated from high school, I moved an hour north of my hometown to attend a small community college and got a job at a local Walmart. Despite having 3 years of experience at Radio Shack, which at the time mainly sold RC cars and Verizon cell phones, I was assigned to their dairy department. Working at the dairy department at Walmart was probably the worst job I've ever had. When the job goes as planned, you should be spending about half your time throwing milk and the other half refilling cheese, eggs, yogurt, etc. However, when I got hired, the dairy supervisor, whom we will call Bill, was new and had some developmental disabilities, causing a lot of people to quit or ask to be transferred to other departments. Eventually, it got so bad that I was the only person in the dairy department besides my manager. Throwing milk is the worst part of the job because about 1 in 20 gallons of milk is defective. It leaks onto other gallons of milk. When you have a room with a couple of 100 gallons of milk, it means a pool of milk in your work area, which gets in your shoes, socks, and pants. It smells fantastic at the end of an 8-hour workday. People quitting at Walmart would not normally be interesting. Most people at Walmart call it Friday. However, a week after I started, the only 2 other grocery stores in town went on strike. A 50-mile radius of probably 200,000 people. Back in 2003 when this happened, the statistics were that for every 10 people that walked into Walmart, 6 walked out with a gallon of milk, meaning that I was now solely responsible for up to 120,000 people's milk needs. Basically, my job became throw milk for 8 hours. I could start throwing as fast as I could from one end, and by the time I got to the other, the side I started out was empty. While that would have sucked enough, as it so happens, it's a requirement in the retail world that you be an idiot to advance to management, and Bill had that in spades. This would come screaming at me that I needed to fill the eggs, yogurt, etc., but wouldn't help me or get help for me for the 120,000 needing their freaking milk. After 3 months of getting yelled at for putting in 100%, you tend to get a little bitter, but also pretty good at whatever you're being yelled at for. I developed a style of throwing that involved grabbing 2 gallons at a time, each crate holding 4 gallons, and using my knee to kick off an empty crate. They also happened to develop crazy upper body strength from this repetitive motion. Anyway, I got a call, while on break, from corporate Radio Shack that they spoke to my ex-boss and really wanted to get me on board to help open a new store in a mall. After I confirmed this was a job offer and not just an interview, I told them I'd be available in 2 weeks after I resigned from Walmart, and they agreed. Fresh off my break, in a great mood, I decided to finish the shift and put in my 2 weeks notice after. But not 60 seconds after I clocked back in, someone from inventory told me that Bill was looking for me and was angry. I didn't care and got back to work, telling the inventory guy to let Bill know I was back on the clock and in the fridge. About 5 to 10 minutes later, Bill bursts open the fridge door and demands to know where I've been. I calmly explain that I was on my break and continue handling gallons of milk. He persists with his aggressive tone, but I respond by saying, "Bill, I've been offered a job from a corporate office. Although I was planning to finish out my 2 weeks, I have decided to give my 2 weeks notice today." I then gently toss 2 gallons of milk underhand towards Bill, which splatter on the concrete floor and drench him from the thighs down. Walking away, I observe his expression change from anger to fear as he realizes he'll be spending the next 8 hours cleaning up milk. Story 9. 2 regions of my company merged into one, and the manager of the other region was difficult to work with. He treated my employees poorly and made them feel inferior, despite the fact that our numbers were better in every category. The reason they chose the other side over ours was due to tax breaks. The company cared more about cheap labor. My employees were given 4 months' notice, but instead of making their lives easier, the manager made it miserable for them. He increased their quota, cut their commissions by 40%, and visited us weekly to criticize us for not hitting the new goals. 1 month after we finally hit the new goal, he reprimanded us for the amount of vacation time used. He even tried to get me fired for granting vacation time to employees who needed it for the job interviews. However, karma finally caught up with him. Over the 2 years that I worked there, I had formed relationships with some corporate folks who believed I would be a great fit for their office to oversee operations for the Midwest region, including the manager's region. I kept my new job offer quiet until the day I showed up at his office with a clipboard and a laptop. The confusion on his face was priceless. Him. "Are you visiting or something?" Me. "You could say that." Him. "Well, I need to make sure security knows you're here." Me. "Oh, they know. I just had to show them my badge." I whipped out my badge and showed him my photo in front of the red, white, and blue flag. He knew I was a corporate employee, and his face showed sheer terror. I was fair to his employees, but I made sure to report every incident where he was rude or condescending. His lack of cooperation and bad attitude were finally exposed, and it only took a little push from corporate to get him out. It was the most satisfying moment of my career. Story 10. I'm an IT consultant with a reputation for being highly competent with Microsoft Exchange Server. A few years ago, I bid on a project to upgrade an Exchange 2003 environment to Exchange 2010. The project involved multiple servers and multiple sites, and it was right up my alley. However, I did not get the job as the firm that won the bid priced the proposal 40% lower than mine, which was already on the lower end. The pricing was totally unrealistic, but they thought they could handle it with their generalist staff who lacked the required expertise in Exchange 2010. I'd previously worked with a customer and had a good relationship with him. Therefore, I warned them that things might not end well for them, but they took it as sour grapes on my part. I had other things to do, so I moved on. 2 weeks after the implementation phase began, the other consulting firm ran into trouble. The entire email system stopped working, and no emails were coming in or out. With no mail flowing between any of the Exchange servers, I found out about the issue when I received a call from the other consulting company, begging me to help them out of the fire. I refused, and an hour later, the owner of the other firm showed up at my front door, trying to convince me to help them for the sake of the customer. This conversation did not go well, and the owner ended up screaming at me. I slammed the door and called the police as I was tired and afraid I might do something stupid if I continued interacting with the guy. The police arrived, and the owner of the other consulting firm was arrested for disorderly conduct. Unfortunately, his car was blocking mine in my driveway, so I had to have it towed off, which cost me money. He spent the next 24 hours in jail, which is average for getting through Dallas County Jail, I was told. The customer contacted me the following day, asking me to fix the mess, but I declined. By then, I had decided that I did not want to be involved in any of that situation, period. The customer eventually hired Microsoft Services to fix everything, which cost them about 5 times what I was going to charge them. The customer then sued the other consulting firm, which promptly filed for bankruptcy and closed its doors rather than deal with the lawsuit. Story 11. Today I missed my bus to help an elderly woman with her groceries, only to have a friend pass me driving and offer to give me a ride home. Story 12. I was working with a difficult coworker at the sandwich shop where I worked. She was 17 and I was 18. One day, while talking to another coworker about my boyfriend's proposal, she made a cruel comment suggesting that he only proposed because of a failed This hurt me deeply, especially since I had just discovered that I had a low chance of conceiving, and I was still very sensitive about it. I went to the supply room to cry, and when I emerged, I asked her to come to the back door so we could talk. I didn't want to argue in front of customers. I told her to mind her own business, and she responded by slapping me hard. I refrained from retaliating because we were in front of a security camera. I went back inside and immediately called my boss. He had seen the incident in the live feed and had recorded it. He came to the store, fired her on the spot, and escorted her out. The last I heard, she was unemployed and pregnant, stuck with a deadbeat partner. Story 13. I worked at a Kmart during high school and had to work in various departments such as electronics, stocking, and cashier. Once, I asked a woman and her son, who was around 12 or 13 years old, if they needed any assistance while I was out on the floor. The son immediately rudely responded and complained about me annoying him. I ignored it and continued with my work. Later, I was called to the checkout counter, and to my surprise, the mother and her son were there with some EA Sports titles and a GTA game that the son had picked out from the electronics section. As I was checking them out, the age prompt appeared on the screen for the M-rated game. I took a chance and decided to inform the mother. This game has been rated M for the following reasons, and read out the list of reasons from the back of the game's case. There was an awkward silence, and then the mother angrily told me that her son said it was only slightly violent. In the end, the kid wasn't able to purchase anything that day.